Well, Zach, thanks for that great presentation. And to Henry and his colleagues at the Non-Proliferation Policy Center for providing me an opportunity to make some comments. Overall, I think Zach's research is a very important contribution to the field. Indeed, I learned quite a bit reading his slides and his presentation in my preparation for tonight's event. What I want to do, and I'm going to do it very briefly, is just flag a couple of issues that I thought were very interesting and then pose some questions to Zach. I want to just make it clear, I am not a non-proliferation expert. My background is really strategic capabilities and extended deterrence. So I'm going to kind of view this or come at this issue from an extended deterrence point of view. Now, the first point that I wanted to raise was Zach's point or statement that, quote, proliferation impacts formal military alliances differently than partners. I think this is probably the most cogent point from his entire presentation. And one of the questions that I have for Zach is whether he thinks that Israel and Pakistan would have gone nuclear if they had had legally binding security guarantees from the United States and they were under the umbrella. If so, are there lessons that we can learn for going forward? For example, should the United States consider legally binding security guarantees to the Gulf states in the future? Now, as many of you know, we have very robust military and security cooperation with the GCC states. Indeed, in the Obama administration, I led U.S. efforts to have a more integrated air and missile defense capability in the region with the GCC partners. But those are not legally binding guarantees. So a question that I have for Zach is as follows. Would formally bringing Saudi Arabia under the U.S. nuclear umbrella dissuade Saudi Arabia from wanting to acquire nuclear weapons? It's a question. The second issue is the issue of launch control. I found the discussion on how the issue of launch control complicated NATO's flexible response options, especially with regards to Britain's nuclear deterrent, to be fascinating. Now, these issues have never fully gone away, but we have found ways to successfully manage them in an alliance context through consultative mechanisms like the NATO Nuclear Planning Group and NATO nuclear sharing arrangements. We've also established, I think, decent bilateral mechanisms with the United Kingdom and, to the lesser extent, the French. For example, we have the US-UK nuclear staff talks. We have the principle of joint decision-making regarding the use of U.S. strategic assets on British territory. That said, I think Zach rightly raises some interesting questions about the impact of these issues going forward in the Asia-Pacific region. While there are currently no U.S. forward-deployed weapons in the Asia-Pacific region, there's an increasing desire for more consultations on nuclear issues, especially in Japan and the Republic of Korea. This desire, I think, can be traced by the 2010 decision by the United States to retire the nuclear sea-based Tomahawk missile, also known as TLAM-N. As a result of that decision, the United States worked with the Japanese government to establish the Extended Deterrence Dialogue, and with the Republic of Korea to establish the Defense Strategy Committee. And there's just this desire since then for more consultations. Indeed, when I would come through the ROK in particular, there's a real interest to move beyond just consultations and talk about nuclear sharing arrangements between the U.S. and the ROK. My colleague, Brad Roberts from Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, and formerly Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear Forces and Missile Defense Policy in the Obama administration, wrote a really good piece on this, which can be found on the Council on Foreign Relations website. And, you know, another question that this brings to mind for you, Zach, is, you know, are there ways that we can more effectively reassure Japan and the ROK so they don't feel the need to go nuclear in the future? The third point is the issue of the qualitative military edge for Israel. I found this just absolutely fascinating. Now, Zach didn't go into the origins of QME fully in his presentation, but I had his notes. So, and one of the things that I found out is that before Israel built its first nuclear bomb, the U.S. hoped it would dissuade it from building bombs by selling them advanced conventional systems. However, as Zach noted in his presentation, after Israel acquired the bomb, the rationale changed to make sure Israel could defend itself conventionally so it didn't need to resort to nuclear use. So my question to Zach is, what's your assessment of the effectiveness of QME in ensuring Israel doesn't resort to nuclear use? Do you think they have generally been pretty effective in reassuring the Israelis, or the Israelis, are they much more concerned? And then the final issue, and Zach talked quite a bit about this in his presentation, is how the acquisition of nuclear weapons by Britain and France actually led them to reduce defense spending. And this is a point that is still relevant today. I don't know if you had a chance to read yesterday's New York Times, but on page A12 of the New York Times, there is an article titled, quote, "Austerity-battered UK is retreating behind a nuclear shield." And I have a great quote from my colleague, Julian Lindley French, who basically uses that statement, you know, that the UK is retreating behind a nuclear shield, no longer with the popular will or capacity to defend the continent. And, you know, one of the questions that I had for Zach, which is a little bit out of the lane of his presentation, is with Britain retreating behind its nuclear shield, you know, what impact will that have on the alliance? So overall, I think it was a really interesting presentation. I think it makes a real contribution to the debate. You know, I've read a lot of literature related to extended deterrence, and I learned quite a bit, especially the pieces on the qualitative military edge. So, Zach, great job, and I'd be interested in your responses to my questions. So, thanks so much for your time.